games at your table. This is Jonathan Albin, and this is NycosRPG's Game Master Soapbox. And I am your host, Jonathan Albin, also known as Game Master J. And I have been a storyteller and game master for very nearly 50 years, close enough that I'll keep saying it anyway. And I wanted to talk today about something kind of important, and it may or may not be a long topic. I know that I'm not going to have any of my usual checkpoints here to talk about because I want to talk about something that's kind of important to me, and that is, what is happiness anyway? I have been uh, an enthusiastic supporter of role playing games for the majority of my life. I've been over supporter of tabletop games of all sorts for as long as I can remember, all the way back to when I was 4 years old and first learned about card games and social interaction, because that was the way my parents had always interacted and connected with people. Pardon me a second. Bit too much shadow back here. Alrighty, so today I want to talk about happiness, and it's been a subject that's been kind of heavy on my mind recently because I am kind of shocked and amazed at how little happiness there seems to be in the world today. I am not a big fan of big media. I don't watch a lot of television. I don't watch a lot of news shows. I don't even get too much into political discussions with people, mainly because it's just not worth it. Although it seems to me that the idea of being a happy person has become almost anathema to our culture. And what I mean by that is it has definitely become a situation where, as a person who is generally happy, I'm constantly having to defend myself. And that sounds like a crazy place to be, but I can't tell you how many people look at conditions in life and situations and wonder, how can you be happy? How can you don't have, you know, pardon me, bad professionalism there. I didn't put a cover on my drink this time. So I got a little bit of product placement by accident. Didn't mean to. Unsolicited, by the way. Nobody's paying me to put anything anywhere. But that's a whole other story, isn't it? But the conversation over what is happiness actually has everything to do with state of mind. I have tried a couple different times. I've put out videos that said, I can promise you happiness if you do these 4 things. And I give out point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4. And finally, I say, if you like what you see, if you subscribe, go ahead and give me some commentary if there's anything you'd like to add. I remind people where they can find me to ask questions. And I offer the opportunity for other people to see how I have gotten to the place of happiness that I've gotten to. And I get no takers. Silence. And it blows me away because you hear so many people talk about how, how messed up our world is and how dissatisfied they are with conditions and how unhappy they are in relationships, or how unhappy they are without a relationship, or how dissatisfied they are with their income or their, honestly, I've never heard anybody say, yeah, I'm really upset that I have made too much money in my life. I just wish it would all go away. Although there probably are people like that, in which case you can send your stuff to the Patreon /Nycos site if you want to. I'm okay with you sending me all of your unneeded funds. That's fine. I'll put it to good use, I promise. Yeah, that's yeah. So the issue though is, what is happiness, and why is it that we say we want happiness? We strive to be happy, and yet so many people are dissatisfied and unhappy, and there's strife and frustration and anger, and it to me is granted, since this is Nycos RPG, I'm going to roll back around to role playing games here in a minute, right? But the idea of being a happy person or having a happy demeanor, many people look at it and go, well, you obviously have to be pretending. There's nobody that's that happy. There's nobody that's that excited with the life they have. Everybody wants something more. Everybody wants more. That's a requirement, I think, for humanity, is for us to be absolutely dissatisfied with everything. And I just find it so fascinating that I could, like I said, I can give you the four things for happiness. I can four keys to happiness, and I won't get any response because a people think I'm lying because nobody thinks there's no way that anybody can give anybody else happiness. There's no way. Number two, um, there's no way he would share that. Even if he had it, it's a secret worth millions, and he would be hoarding it up and asking for big piles of cash before he gave it away. And I'll be honest, I'm going to give you the four today before we're done with the show. I'm going to give you all four of the keys to happiness, and they'll be a shock. They'll be a surprise. And number three is no one would practice them. If these were the four simplest things to do in the world, if these were four conditions for absolute enthusiasm about your life, and I said, here they are, I'm going to give them to you, you would not believe me anyhow. Because if you did believe me somehow, and you participated and took those four pieces of advice to heart, and you acted upon them, then you'd be happy. And if you were happy, why change anything, right? You're already there. You've already achieved, right? So therefore, when I say that there are keys to happiness, no one's going to buy it because they don't believe there's anything to be purchased. Number two, they're not going to see any value to it because it was given away. It couldn't have been very valuable if it was given away. Number three, if I actually had it, I would apply it to my own life, and therefore I wouldn't be creating videos. I would be, sitting on an island someplace, drinking Mai Tais and enjoying the view. I wouldn't be, sitting in my relatively warm abode here and pontificating about happiness. And number four, if I had that kind of happiness, wouldn't it be more than likely that someone would have stolen it from me, taken it from me, undermined me in some fashion? And there's no proof of my argument because there aren't 1,000 people that have written reviews saying what Jonathan said was exactly true. I have absolute happiness now because of the four things that John told me about. So it's kind of funny that if I established that there were four, and I presented each one of them independently and did not charge a fee, didn't send you to a website, didn't say, okay, so welcome back, Xanderful. Everyone's definition of happy is different for every individual. One man's key is not guaranteed to be the key for others. No, but my point here is that I said if, I did qualify, if there was a path to happiness that did take four steps, if that did exist, then why is it that there is no response to the video? Now, argumentatively, yes, if there's only one way to happiness, then that might be the case. If there are multiple ways to happiness, that also would still, you think there'd be, every book on the bookshelf from position 1 to position 10 every week would be the 10 keys to happiness, the 7 keys to happiness, or whatever. I believe there are only 4. I believe the 4 keys to happiness do exist, and they do apply to everybody if they look at it in the framework and the context of which I'm speaking. And that is, first of all, to realize that happiness, by definition, is a state of mind, right? It's a condition in here. It's not something that is placed on me. I can't be given happiness. I can't provide it to you wherever you are, right? I can't establish it as something that exists in your life for you. You have to internalize it, right? So that's the first thing. As you've already pointed out, happiness is different to every person. But happiness, by definition, we can all point at it and say, that's happiness. Happiness is what? If we want to clarify, happiness is lack of worry, right? Happiness is abundance. having enough. A third thing about happiness is it is a euphoric state. We don't feel depressed when we're happy. We feel joy, So it's got a physical manifestation. Well, you can you give happiness? I wonder at that. Do we actually give someone else happiness, or do we just point it out for them and then they take advantage of it and take ownership of it? I'm sorry for my lens freaking out. It does that every once in a while. Maybe it's my hat. Maybe it's the light. I don't know. Let's see. Oh, that's true. That's true. But I'm qualifying. There are how many people that are watching the internet tonight? How many people are on Twitch right now that are watching channels? Now, they're not looking for this conversation. They're busy watching their favorite role play game being played through or whatever. And that itself is a key to happiness, right? Because you have to have diversion. Right. No, I didn't, because happiness is a state of mind. I can give proof of that. When I say that happiness is a state of mind, I can tell you that um, in 1997, arguably the worst day of my existence on Earth, my daughter was killed in a car accident, and there is nothing blacker. There's nothing worse than to be made aware of that kind of permanent loss. And it doesn't hit you all at once, and it doesn't hit you the same. And just as we said, happiness is a state of mind. Loss can affect your state of mind. But I say all of that because at the same time that I was feeling all of that tragedy, all of that loss, all of that darkness, I was able to be happy with the fact that my son wasn't also killed, that my mother-in-law wasn't also killed, that my spouse didn't also die. I mean, it sounds horrible to be able to say that. Ooh, I put my hands out in front of the camera. That's what did it last time. Okay. Uh, the idea that happiness is a graduated thing, that it is a state of mind. I I was in grief over the loss. I was devastated. And yet that very night I had friends over, and uh, we actually engaged in a game session. We played some games. I can't tell you really which ones they were, but I do know that it was my games playing friends that were there with me. It didn't give me any uh, elevation. It wasn't a bad, it wasn't a joyous reunion, so to speak. But here's what it was: the ability to be a happy person and to have happiness doesn't have to depend on your situation any more than it doesn't. Right, right. You look at the hindsight of everything. And the reality is, we can only have hindsight. There is no such thing as foresight. We can project, we can present forward a position or a theory or an attitude, but we don't actually operate except for consistently in the past. That's where we live, so to speak. And when I speak of what is happiness, happiness as a state of mind, and I'm clarifying that. So, as to your first point, it's got to be definable and something we can all agree on. I am stating absolutely that happiness is a state of mind. It isn't a condition, if you understand the differences between them. Happiness is something that we carry or present within ourselves to the world. It's not something that the world visits upon us. I mean, granted, don't get me wrong. Somebody told me, "Congratulations, Jonathan, you just won the lottery, and there's, you know, $74 million sitting in a bank someplace with your name on it." That would be exciting. It would be a positive experience. Ooh, camera. That is so weird that the camera's doing that to me tonight in particular. Maybe it's just not the proper lighting. I don't know. The idea, though, is that if it's a state of mind, then it's something you carry all the time or can carry with you all the time. And the graduated levels of happiness is, I mean, since happiness, plural, that terminology covers, right, a spectrum. The loss of my daughter was a spike downward, very deeply downward. And yet the fact that I knew that people wanted to be around me, that there was a world that was going to continue. In fact, there were multiple worlds, because my biggest advocates at that time were the people that actually played in the role play games that I played in and that I administered for, because they said, you can't, you're not gone, you're not lost, you're still here. We have a story to hear. We still want to be a part of that. And all of that gave me an opportunity to raise that bar back up, above, below the ground where it was. So, if therefore happiness is a mindset, it's something you carry with it, then I can define the four things you need to have. First one is awareness. You need to be aware of where you are in the world in reference to everything, and that's sometimes difficult to identify or connect with. But the idea that I know where I am financially is not the best place. I know that there have been times when I've, generated a lot more money than I have generated this last month. There have been times when I've sat on relatively large bank accounts, and now it's not one of them. So I could, take that as a downward slope on my happiness degree. that's fair, Xanderfell. Winning a lottery would be important. Knowing how much it is might make a difference. I don't know. To me, the biggest challenge would be you don't have it immediately. It's you have to gear up for that, just like you have to gear up for anything else. The reality is that if you can know where you are in all states, do I have healthy relationships with the people that I have relationships with? Yes, all my relationships are in good condition right now. Nobody's upset with me. There's nobody wanting to throw daggers at me that I know of. Most people that are upset with me, their upset is now decades ago, and so they probably don't even remember what they were upset with me about. But the concept of awareness of where you are is a matter of what I call neutral buoyancy. And what I mean about that is that if you are a buoyant personality, if you are a happy person, then, as my grandfather would say, it would be, I'm a bobber person. And I don't know if you've ever done any fishing, lake fishing in particular. My grandfather was a big time fisherman. And yes. That buoyancy is always going to keep you on an acceleration curve. It might have a less steep curve. You may be down, driven down, like the loss of my daughter drove it way down. But generally, I'm on an upwardly mobile course in all of life because I have a happy demeanor. I have friends who use terms like unflappable or tenacious or insane when they talk about me, because very little can drag me down off of the happy approach. That doesn't mean that I'm here every day. I mean, goodness knows the week out bills are due and things like that, I tend to be a little less so. Well, hey, let's see. You went fishing once and you had a crab that wouldn't let you go. Sounds like my marriage. Ha ha ha! Okay, that was a joke. I was married for 23 years and I don't miss a minute of it. I just wish I didn't know about the last 4 months of it. But that's a whole different story. Um, but even that, the idea of this bobber mentality that's driving you upwards. It's a friend of mine says it this way: if you're going through hell, keep on moving, because if you move fast enough, you might find yourself back out before the devil and even knew you were there. And that's kind of the take that I have on life. And um, if you went fishing once and you got a crab that wouldn't let you go, as long as it wasn't on your fingers or toes, you're probably miles ahead. If they grabbed hold of your fish line, that'd be a pain in the butt. So, but fishing, the idea of a bobber, just so you know, is a small plastic, usually hollow device or cork, made out of cork, that has a connection to the fishing line, and therefore the line dangles down in the water. But the bobber is called that because it bobs on the surface. It's like a small buoy put on your fish line. And so you can tell when a fish bites, because when the fish bites, it drags the water, the line down into the water. Yeah, there you go. No, I don't ever do that because you go back into hell pretty quickly. I went from, life's pretty good to loss of my daughter to life's getting better to the point where I thought everything was fixed, and then I lost my marriage. So the dragging you back down into, and yeah, I don't want to flip off anybody, even the person in 7-7-3-4. I don't want to he double hockey sticks, whatever. I don't want to. He might actually get me at some point, so I'd rather keep my nose up, so to speak. And yeah, the bobber mentality, therefore, is that even if something drags you under, your tendency is still to bob to the surface. And the surface is really where life is, right? Life is really where it is. We have where we want it to be, the hopes and dreams, and we have the crap that drags us downwards. But somewhere in the middle is where we should be. And so happiness, again, state of mind, upwardly focused. There is going to be a day better. My grandfather was always full of great wisdom. His One of his other favorite sayings was that this too shall pass. TTSP. That whatever condition you are finding yourself in right now, it's going to be different in a while. And so do not assume this is now a foundation. Just realize that if you're constantly in an upward attitude, yeah, I don't buy that. SSDD is a lot of people say that, and the reality is that it's not the SS. We're one day further down the road. So, from a negative argumentation, you say, well, we have 22,000 days plus for our lives, and now we're down at 24 hours, so that's one less day. And then someone else says, well, it's the same stuff, different day, and it's like, well, no, every problem is sufficient for the day. We got enough problems. We don't have to go saying, well, it's the same as yesterday, because it's not. And the challenges that we face change over time. So I understand people saying SSDD, but I like TTSP because if you are aware that things both up and down are not going to stay the same, then at least you have the ability to bobber it. You have an ability to change your trajectory. So again, first is state of mind. The second establishment is knowing where you are on all fronts. So relationship wise, I don't have a significant other, but I also don't have anybody telling me what to do. So I'm optimistic that there are people out there that I do care for and that I do love, and whether or not they reciprocate is really not my concern. I'm going to keep my nose up and keep rolling. When it comes to economics, yeah, I'm not where I want to be, but I do see a future where that's going to be different. In terms of my games environment, right now I'm on a high. I'm running 5 game sessions a week right now. Couldn't be happier, except I'd like to have 7 or 9. I like telling stories, and I like players that are engaged. And I'm more particular. I like to run different kinds of stories, so I'm looking forward to being able to add a post-apocalyptic story and a Call of Cthulhu story, whatever, to all these different genres that I'm not currently running. I'd love to add all of them, but generally speaking, I'm in a good place right now. But I've had groups that have dropped out too. I had a group drop down to 2 players 2 weeks ago. Now this last week it was 8 again, so I'm all over the board. But the idea is that, let's see, not healthy for some, numb yourself or desensitize yourself to it, and then you can't screw with it can't screw with you anymore. Well, I'll tell you what, I think that this goes to another thing that it comes from sports, and that is keep your eye on the ball. If you have 1,000 things going on, you've got one that's troublesome, and it's going to come up and it's going to bite you in the butt again. You're right in a way to be able to say, okay, that's not going to drag me down. That doesn't mean you're not aware of it. That doesn't mean you don't roll with it when it gets there. You just don't let it be an anchor. Let it just be a factor of your buoyancy. As long as your nose stays up, even if it causes a dip down, because of things going south or whatever, it's okay. But as far as not letting it screw with you, if there's something that's screwing with me, I want to figure out what it is and then figure out how to resolve it. Because in order to get past those kind of things, we need to be able to encapsulate them and resolve them. And if in certain cases, I have a very good friend who's paraplegic. He's been in a wheelchair the majority of his life, and that man is implacable. You can't knock him over, with a steamroller, because he's just gonna pop back up. Now he won't tell you he's an optimist. He won't throw himself into my happiness characteristic. He just, he says, I'm just enduring. But the reality is that he's indomitable. You're not going to keep him down. And yes, he's always going to have problems with his physical health. Yes, over time it may get him, but the point is that he doesn't. Well, he does acknowledge it. He does what he can with it. He doesn't let it change that attitude, change that nose up approach. So that's the second thing. The third thing you have to have is a target, an objective. And that objective can be as ephemeral as, I want to make it through today. Please just let me get through this one thing. Or it can be as general as, in like my case, it's very specific. I want NycosRPG as a role-playing game to be used in the same breath when somebody says games like, and then they say Dungeons and Dragons. I want to be able to say Dungeons, Dragons, or Nykos, because they're two different animals, they're two different strategies, two different philosophies, and yet they are fundamentally from the same category. So it would bring great joy to me to know that you watched one of my videos and then you went over and watched the how-to videos on how to play NycosRPG, that you maybe purchased one of the books and that you're actually considering playing or even running a role play game in the NycosRPG mechanism. That would be, those are the heights. I'm to have a national sales objective met. If I could sell 1,000 copies of NycosRPG in the next 90 days, that would be awesome. I mean, that's where I'm kind of focusing, but that means a lot of work on my part because I have to get other people to make decisions. And that is where this whole happiness thing comes from, because I have tried a dozen different ways of saying, try it, try it, try it. And people that see, try it, try it, try it, they automatically assess that, well, you're going to make money on it, so I don't want to pursue it. Or I already have something that works okay, so why would I want to try something else? And the reality is that happiness to me is achieving goals, but you have to work, right? That's the trade-off, is there has to be some sort of work towards that goal. And that work seems to, in many people's minds at least, break down what it means to be happy. Because if I'm working, then how can I be happy? Because if I'm happy, then I'm, sitting on a beach someplace, So Xenophil is saying there's multiple philosophies. There's a hindsight to everything. There's someone who's had it worse. stress not on what you can't control. It's going to happen. Figure out how to do it. See, these all fit directly into what is it? The Irish prayer, right? The I almost messed that up. The may the wind always be at your back. May fortune find you, etc. That that philosophy does fit. My point is that happiness is what you have while waiting and watching for all these other things. So happiness is a positional attitude. A friend of mine uses the term attitude of gratitude, that you're aware of everything that you have and how you've achieved it and how many other people were involved with you getting you there, and that you are acknowledging and thankful for those that have. And I have to say that I absolutely do have an attitude of gratitude. I can't tell you how many players I've had at my games over this 50 years that gave as good as they got as far as joy and happiness in gameplay. And the idea of achieving happiness with a centered position, an upwardly buoyant attitude, and an attitude of gratitude or an awareness of what it took to get here, and an acknowledgement of what has gone before. These three things kind of set up the positioning of how we get to happiness. But what is happiness? That's where we run into the blurry line, is that what is happiness? To me, happiness is being contentedly discontented. And that is, I have everything that I need to live. It's not optimal. It's not the best it could be. My friends would argue that it's putting me further into debt. It's not increasing my net worth. But the reality is that what I am getting out of it is more than what I'm putting in. If you feel the fortune gained was not deserved, then share it with those who would appreciate it. That's a good interesting one. Yeah, but the the issue there is that if your fortune feels like it was not earned, you're doing something wrong. If you're doing anything in the world and you receive a bounty on it, if you receive a reward for it, then that reward was deserved. There was something that you did to earn that. That doesn't mean that the universe is going to give you a one-to-one correlation. I think that I watched a lot of my associates get brought into the concept of intention focused living, where they intend for things to happen, they lean towards them with expectant heart, and then they don't do the demand part of that. They do not provide the very services that they projected they would be doing to receive, and then they're surprised when it doesn't when they don't achieve it. And I think that's problematic. I think that the fact that in all the time that I've been on Twitch, and all the time I've been on Discord, and every day I say I'm going to be on at 11 o'clock, you would think there'd be some people that would be dedicated to that and hop on every time I broadcast. But I'm not important. I'm I hope to have an audience at some point. I hope to reach people where they are and bring them their part of the way towards happiness. But I think it's also off-putting when I tell people that I am happy, because they are concerned. Because if I'm happy, then they don't think that means I'm going to work any harder. That I'm not going to be trying anymore. Oh, sure, I got that. Feel free. Um, I don't. Yeah, first of all, I don't ever want to doubt a feeling, because it took until I was a divorced person to realize that feeling and reality are not as far apart as I would have thought. Um, I had done everything that I thought I was supposed to do as a husband and partner, and it came out of the horrible conversations at the end that uh, the other person was not feeling that I had done anything, that they had a written off my um, performance as perfunctory, that I was only doing it, I was only being a spouse because I had to, and it couldn't have been further from the truth. The the real challenge was with feelings, is that feelings do not necessarily have any anchor in substantiable reality. And so to say I felt that I'm undeserving, there were times when I was a married person, I certainly felt that I was undeserving of the wondrous person who had married me. But she didn't see her own worth as being that. She only considered herself to be a trophy wife, which was insulting at the least and heartbreaking at the worst. But the idea that what we receive we don't deserve. I argue the other way around. In a lot of cases, sometimes we get exactly what we deserve, and what we deserve is a lot less than we estimated because we have self worth. So that's a sticky wicket, I suppose. I'm going to wait for Danderville's response here because he had something coming, so I'll deal with that in a moment. But so the four things, if we want to talk about the secrets of happiness. Number one is that it's an internal self-realization. It's a attitude. It is a mental condition that we bring to ourselves. It is a self-awareness, right? It's an emotional state. It's an upwardly buoyant one that's implacable, can't be knocked off its kilter, or if it gets bobbled, at least it always is moving upward. Bobber mentality. It's internal. It's um, aware of its positioning compared to everything, so that it's not a false sense of happiness. It's not a false awareness. It's actual, relativistically speaking, a positional condition of upward mobility in attitude and such. And it's also something that is going to be able to be seen more clearly in hindsight, and therefore can be validated or affirmed by others in watching your advancements. In other words, if you asked 100% of my games groups whether I'm a happy person, they'd say I'm, like I said, crazy. I mean, I'm unnaturally so. Do, do, do. Oh, okay. Okay, I get that. I get that. I can give an exact example of the same thing, but a different response. Yeah, and of course they're going to refuse. I was sitting on the side of the road. I kid you not. This was over by uh, a store in Southern California known as Gameology. I was there's an intersection of Mountain Avenue and Foothill where the game store is, and there's a fast food place. Doesn't matter which one, but there's a fast food place. And I was sitting on the grass. I kid you not, sitting on the grass under a tree adjacent to Foothill. Now, I got a beard. Then it was perhaps a little bit more scraggly. And I had on a hat, but it was a baseball cap. And I had just, like I have on today, t-shirt and jeans. I was sitting there on the side of the road. Car pulls up. Guy rolls down the window, asks me if I have a place to stay. I said, yeah, I live in San Bernardino. He goes, oh, do you need a ride? I go, well, I'm waiting for the bus. The reason why I'm waiting here, I'm just going to catch the bus here in a minute. He goes, you need some money? No, I'm fine. It was positional. It totally was in this person's mind that I must be somebody who is in need. I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm older. Maybe it's because I don't think I'm old. I look at my face and I go, not a wrinkle on me, baby. Not a wrinkle on me, except for these down here. I've got these ugly down here. That's the reason why I grow a beard. But oh, yeah, but see, the issue there was not okay. You realize that the happiness quotient is not on your part in that case. The person that was doing the thing, putting the money in your pocket, laying the money down beside you, they were doing the thing about happiness. You were taking a nap. You were unaware. So you couldn't be undeserving. You know, you may feel bad about it. You could be guilty for your response. You could be remorseful, I suppose. But that shouldn't take away your happiness. You should be happy that the money was there. Somebody thought enough of you to put that dough where you could get to it. So I don't. I think your concept of saying that I'm undeserving is unwarranted in this case because there's nothing that you did that either made you deserving or undeserving. The guy pulled over and asked me questions and offered me a place to stay and food and all kinds of things. He wasn't doing anything that he didn't want to do, and he was thinking he was doing a good thing. Now, in my case, I was like, "No, I'm good. I'm doing fine." So it's really what I'm talking about when I say happiness. It's got nothing to do with another person. It really doesn't. It can't, because if happiness depended on somebody else, number one, I'd still be married because my wife would be happy because I tried to make her happy. You're going to be happy and like it, damn it. That was, you know. So I could okay. So hey, thanks a lot, nerdy Sakura. Oh, sneak past my guards. You're a funny person, and that's funny. So yay! Somebody snuck in. That's great. Thank you, Sakura. Welcome. Glad to have you with us. Yeah, so we're talking about happiness and what it is anyway, and we're doing it in reference to role play games, but I'm doing it also on a broader scale because the reality is that I've been putting videos out for years, and when I started, I was doing live RPGs similar to what you see on about every other Nycos and every other Dungeons and Dragons channel, as far as running a group, and I had multiple players involved and stuff. And then in the last year or so, I've been doing these informational videos on how to help game master and stuff. And today's game master soapbox I got on was, oh, yes, definitely. Uh, that's fair. That's fine. That's fair. I wouldn't know. Um, the idea of happiness, though, is internalized. It's something you bring with you. It's something that you can't have unless you're situationally aware of where you are on all the different stratas. You've got to be in a buoyant, upwardly mobile, moving towards whatever. You got to have an objective, and you've got to feel like you're making headway towards that. These are the things that make happiness happen. It's not something that you create on your own, and it certainly isn't something that someone else creates for you. I know that the discussion has kind of spiraled in that direction because we were talking about a particular instance. But the situation is that we are able to carry forward with happiness separate from all variables. Nice. Nice. That passive stealth. Yeah. More than likely. On the other hand, if the guards were actively trying to prevent somebody from uh, being on this show, that would explain why I've had such low viewership. Never thought about the fact that there might be YouTube guards or Twitch guards that are out there. So Okay, I don't watch Naruto. I don't even I know vaguely that Naruto was a trading card game, but that was back in my days when I was the tournament liaison for Konami for the Yu-Gi-Oh trading card brand. So well, I only know a little bit of Japanese. I was in Okinawa for a couple of temporary terms when I was in the military, and I have, of course, when I worked for Konami, I got to visit the home offices a couple of times. So, yeah, the Naruto card game went the way of the dodo in must have been 2000 or earlier. It came out. It was one of the early adopters, as they would say culturally. And it was a game that came out pretty early in the framework, but it was put up by uh, Namco Bandai back when it was just Bandai. They did the Naruto card game and a couple of other board games, as well as their miniatures and models and such. So that was back in time. That was 2007 to 2014 that I was there. So the Naruto was gone by then. Actually, I was working with Konami with the Game Manufacturers Association when I worked with the Bandai folks for space at the shows. Oh, that's fine. That's fine. Sakura is probably a name kind of like Jonathan or Timothy or um, Parsival or whatever. It probably has 100 other people that have the same name, but I like the fact that it's nerdy Sakura. It's that I of course I've always had the discussion with people about whether I'm a geek or a nerd or a dweeb or whatever. Persona 5 used it as a last name. I don't even know what that is. So if it's another manga or anime, you guys are now talking past me. I'm now feeling old. Yeah, well, okay. I don't even know most RPG games. It's really funny. I actually let me rephrase that. RPG games, tabletop, I know virtually all of them. I have run games in virtually all of them. There's a couple of the new ones I haven't played yet, Modifius and Mothership and things like that. But I've even read through their materials, and I think pretty much I could probably run a game in those, although I probably wouldn't be as cool because I wouldn't know the current lingo and lore. But the yep, you got me. I now sit back and defer to the wisdom of the players. You guys know what you're talking about. It's not that it's not my cup of tea. I kind of um, cut my teeth on uh, Johnny Sacco and Giant Robot back in the day, and of course Speed Racer was the only uh, anime show that I watched, but I watched it, of course, in all English translation and subtitles, so I didn't know any of the others. Cool, cool. I haven't run much in Pathfinder. I was in D&D at 3.0, 3.5 at the time. Since they switched the storyline over to Pathfinder branded, I haven't played any of those. Although arguably I could run a role play game in them, I just wouldn't carry the lore forward, and that's probably the case in most of them. I'm big on ambiance and not necessarily on content. Oh, okay, fair enough, fair enough. Uh, the the mechanism for Pathfinder I know is basically Dungeons and Dragons 3.0, 3.5, purchased by Paizo Publishing when D&D was prepping for D&D 4th. So Yeah, that's a great point, Nerdy Zachary. If you play in a Nycos RPG game, it takes 20 minutes or less, and you're playing. The mechanism for the game that I've devised literally short circuits all of the things that make character creation take so long. And in another video, we can talk about the particulars like that. And if you haven't, go to my YouTube channel, which is at NycosRPG, and take a look at the playlist "How to Play Nycos RPG," and there's a whole slew of episodes on how different parts of it can be uh, run through or whatever. And taking 5 hours to put a character together, that's about right for a Pathfinder game. From most that I've read about um, the Pathfinder lore set, it's a very sophisticated rule system with a lot of rules as written material that you have to know. Oh, that's fair. That's fair. It's a familiarity issue. Also, the Pathfinder lore is different, so it probably takes some time to get into that one. Ha! That's fair, Zenderfell. Character creation depends on the person making the character. I would posit that we could build a character for each one of you in the next 20 minutes for Nycos RPG, period. Simply because I use a method that I call the Gumby method, and it takes very, very little to get started. Mainly because we get rid of the things that take up so much time. You don't have to make a choice about what class you are playing with, so to speak, because everybody can take skills from every source. So if you want to be a fighter who throws a couple of magic missiles from time to time, okay, but magic missiles isn't even a thing. So the yep, there's the feats. Yep, nice, nice. See the mechanisms of role play games. See this is, you want to know what happiness is? What is happiness is this conversation. This is what happiness looks like. We're having a conversation. We have different focuses and we have different agendas, and we're able to communicate them all. Um, I like the idea of having a character who has parkour skills, who happens to have roguelike skills. But then again, if I wanted to have a parkour rogue who also wanted to carry around a series of runes and do fortune telling, he could do that as well. And so, yeah. And Xanafil, I remember you said you had like a 5,000 word backstory that you were working on the other day. So that's funny. That's funny. You see, to me, the first one of the first things that you look at when you talk about role playing games for me is that the role play of a backstory is more fun than the written creation of it. And what I mean by that is in the Nikos RPG system, when you develop a character, when you're rolling up the numbers to come up with which persona you are, you're not actually building a persona. Instead, you're matching up to one that already exists. And so the mystery and the wonder of what your quote backstory is yet to be discovered. So when you jump into the story, you literally are a persona who has no concept of what's happened before. You jumped in, you know what your species is, you know what your physical traits are, therefore. You have an idea of where you were raised. You have something of a knowledge of what you want to have as far as initial motivations. And with those things, you just build a skills list. The rest of it, the rest of the backstory comes from discovery as you're playing the persona. From day one, from minute one, you're actually discovering it. Right. Yep, that's not surprising. That's not surprising. The reality is that the very concept of the backstory, most people aren't aware of this, but Dungeons and Dragons up until uh, third edition didn't have backstories at all. You just built your character and went. The concept of the backstory was actually created in the third edition because game masters who were new to the game had no way of linking the persona into the story because the feats and skills were so across the board different with all the different publishers that were making D20 material, with all the Pathfinder new stuff that was coming out. There was so much that most game masters just threw up their hands and said, "Right, write a backstory worthy of Mordor." I mean, they asked the players to do that work. Well, the problem with that is that led to the players thinking, and perhaps in some cases, I'd argue, overthinking what had happened before the characters started playing. And when you do that, when you start to build the everything that came before for the persona, now you're doing all of the work that a role play game should be doing. You should be discovering these things in play, because otherwise you're not playing the role, you're making the role, and then you are only then acting. You're not actually role playing anymore. So sure, sure. I get what you're saying, and that's fine. But those are all things that could be discovered in play. You give me just three of those pieces, and then I start to tell you a story, and then the way you react to them tells me what you want to know more, and therefore it amplifies backwards. Okay, that's fair because that means you actually created a persona on your world, and now you're going to move it to another person's world. To me, that's fundamentally the same, but now you're adding an extra layer because if you jumped in as the persona and had to discover all these things in game, then you would be just like this character having to discover these things in game, right? So it would the to me the real issue is that as a game master, when I bring new players into the game, I want to enjoy and appreciate the experience of their discovery as much as they do. And when you have done a lot of back work on your character's lore and then you bring it to the table, you are depriving the storyteller, the game master, of the ability of integrating that with what he was already building. And now he has to work in a different way with a different set of parameters to try to get what you have in your noggin about your persona into the character he was planning on GMing for. So it's just an ideological difference. But the point is that this conversation, this is when I talk about what happiness is. This is my wheelhouse. This is where I like to operate, is engaging with other minds about a subject and enjoying the back and forth between us. And there's not a there's nothing in this conversation that is a contract that says that I have to do anything for you, and there's nothing that you have to do for me. Well, that's fine. That's fine. If you're going into a whole new world, that's fine. Make a whole new character. But the whole point is that when you make that whole new character may already exist. You just have to discover it. And that discovery process can happen in game. You know, like for example, if you say, I'd like to come from a big family. Okay, you're when your character pops into the world, the first thing that happens is somebody walks in the scene and says, "Hey, what's your name?" Whatever the character's name is. Mom wants us for dinner. You need to stop by and pick up a couple of carrots. You didn't know you had a family. Now you know you got a family, and she's going to want about 10 or 12 pounds. Well, that's a big family. That's a lot of carrots. So your understanding of who you are in story is a formative process. And the more you integrate with who the storyteller is in the game world that he's developing, the more integrated and more lifelike that persona becomes for you. Okay. Again, that's easy enough to play into without having to have a backstory. Is all I'm trying to say. And I think the other problem is that in a lot of situations, the players are afraid the GM is not going to be creative enough or open enough to what they want to include. So they automatically build all the walls and cages and barriers into their character build so that when they hand off the fully developed uh, backstory, the game master has to find ways to make that round marble that's so nice and smooth fit in the square peg space that he had for a cookie cutter new character. That it's difficult for the two and it feels a little chafing and uncomfortable because I, as a game master, don't hold in my head the same viewpoints you have about persona and background and characters or whatever. And so by having just a very bare bones minimum, of saying, well, I want to have, you know, I don't even know that I want players to know how many relatives they have when they jump into a game world because that biases their role play. And that, I think, goes back to when you're talking about the ancient history. Take my teeth out. Or back in my day, we used to have to build a character and then play whatever we rolled up. We didn't build to suit. It wasn't like modern housing. You didn't design your 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2-story split level and then plunk it down in, whatever marketplace. The idea that, well, and that's interesting. It's going to look out of place in his world. So did you build it specifically for that purpose, or you chose to bring a character over because you want to explore that character in somebody else's world? That's okay too. But on Nikos, there are 35 species and 197 countries you can be from. So anywhere you go, you could be looking odd or different. So you could be dropped into any system. So that'd be funny too. So that is cool. If what you're looking for is the distinction of uniqueness, that's arguably about a honorable decision. And every game master, of course, is different about how they do it. Yeah, the point here is that with a 50-year run, this is it's a continuously running looping storyline. Each loop is about 6 to 7 years real time before it finishes a loop and starts over. And each loop, therefore, overlays on a previous loop, and therefore there are Easter eggs dating back to when I was 11 years old, when I was 15 years old, when I was 25, 45, when my son was 11, et cetera, et cetera. There's all these different places, all this lore stacked together that you literally are chock full of stuff to do at all times. And so there's the variety. I've had people say that the variety leaves you breathless. It takes more time to decide what you want to play than it does to decide how you're going to play it. And so it's just a very different dynamic. And one of the benefits of having so many different species is that the starting points for them are spread across a planet. And so a player's choice of where they come from culturally matters. And therefore, for example, if you're going to be bringing a character that's name is Yuki Tsukino, Tsukino, I pronounced that wrong, Tsukino, that would more than likely mean that you came from one of the Crimson Isles. And the idea of the Crimson Isles is an off-coast island culture, and therefore it has a lot of uniqueness to it. So necromancer sociopath. Okay, whoa, we can have a different conversation. Yay! We can completely change the order of this. Let's change away from what is happiness here for a second. Let's talk about what is trouble. Sociopath. When you say the term sociopath, to what do you refer? If you mean antisocial behavior and inability to work with other players in a game session, I'm probably going to say no, just on that standpoint alone, because it's not fun for everyone. And a role play game has to be fun for all the players that sit down. Now, granted, in a session zero, you could talk with other players and have that conversation and say, hey, I'd like to play a sociopath or whatever. Now, as far as the specifics of, let's see. Okay, who's making your clothes? Um, I'd argue that as soon as your clothes get dirty or torn up, you are no longer going to be looking like a Japanese schoolgirl. You're going to look like a person uh, with Asian features in medieval clothing. Well, is your town also Japanese? If you're off world, if you're on a new planet, wouldn't that be a problem? Because who would make clothes for a Japanese schoolgirl unless there are other Japanese schoolgirls around? So your uniqueness is flying in the face of what would be the quote reality of the story. So I'm with you about the fact that it can be in the fantasy theme and it can be 100% medieval. But there's a great, if you haven't seen The 13th Warrior, I would recommend you take a look at that film. In The 13th Warrior, there is a person who is basically well, they don't specify which portion of Arabia he's from, but he's uh, an Arabian uh, nobleman who offends his mm, cultural leader or whatever and gets sent to live among the Vikings. And it's fascinating to watch because he does keep his gear for about the first third of the film. As far as his clothing, he does his own laundry and stuff. He keeps it all together. But when you pop out on the other end, you're in Viking culture, and by the end of his time with the Vikings, he still has all of his clothing and gear, but he's now um, his normal day to day gear is uh, Viking warrior gear. So right, no, I get you, That's fair, and that's really what I was trying to say is that your purpose for being unique as a schoolgirl dropping in is going to have its shock value for a few days or maybe a month or two, and then eventually your clothing is going to change to the modern world there. And when it does, the novelty and the specialty of being a Japanese schoolgirl in that environment will also be lost. I'm not saying that it will be lost. Perhaps there are tailors that can be hired to make additional costumes or whatever. But I'm just saying that it seems sort of counterculture to allow that kind of thing to continue. Well, okay, so the only sociopath that I know, he was totally sociable, but he could not have any original concepts of his own because he didn't know how people felt. And so he would talk over. Now, in this case, he was not only an actual sociopath himself, he was playing a sociopath, and therefore his character performed the same kind of behaviors that he did, which caused him to have alienating circumstances. Even though he's trying to be social, people would notice that things were not normal in his behavior and would shun him culturally. And I don't know. You're saying that introverts are more antisocial. They're not antisocial. They are cautious. They're not social by any stretch, but they're not antisocial. They they're okay. So for clarification, the concept of antisocial does not mean to be unsociable. An antisocial persona is one who undermines the social norm by their actions. So that's what I'm trying to say. Oh, sure, sure. I get that. I get that. You could do that with playing a Franciscan monk. They also don't tend to wear anything that's armor like. Now, D&D shunned the medieval monk completely out of existence except for the Asian monk, and that's because we all everybody loves kung fu fighting, right? Like the song says. So, and as far as Dungeons and Dragons, armor classes are humorous at best, anyway. So, yeah, that's good. That's good that you could have a lower strength. Sure. See, I'm a yes and kind of guy. So, in an RPG sense, one is not bothered or ruled by emotions. I okay. I don't know of a role playing game out there that demands it anyway. In today's modern play environment, fifth edition doesn't have anything that even allows you to identify or define a character as being a sociopath or anything because there are no rules for psychology in the game. So, oh, I see. I see. Yeah, that makes sense. The reason why it requires 10 strength to carry armor so you don't wear any armor. That makes sense. Okay, lizard folk by D&D rules aren't actually a playable race anyway, unless they've changed that. Your GM may be allowing you to play one, but lizard folk, as written, are intentionally written as antisocial because they are bad tempered and crude and roast babies over spitted fires. So, if again, if your game master is providing you the plenitude to run that class, that species, then more power to him. You know, not in Nikos you can play lizard folk. As a matter of fact, they're called the Lacertine, and you literally can play any kind of lizard you want. So you could play as quick as a gecko or as slow as a um, monitor lizard or Komodo dragon. So, as a matter of fact, Komodo or the frilled iguanas are about as close as you get to dragon folk on Nikos, because dragons are a different thing altogether. Well, they're by again, Dungeons and Dragons lizard folk are not they're subsentient. They're not sentient. They are portrayed as being equivalent to uh, like a caveman, but much more carnal and carnivorous. Like I said, they roast babies over spits, so they're not lizard folk. For the way D&D defines them, lizard folk are not playable. I don't think. If the game master's allowing you to, then like I said, bless your heart. So yeah, no more power to you in whatever games you play. That the environment is not there's not a condition, and the position that I'm taking about GMing is a completely separate issue. So 5E, isn't he? I gotta go see that. I think they're a 5E playable option from Xanathars. Oh, they're from Volos. and they're not considered playable. Let me double check. They have attributes and stats in that book, and listing them as a playable. Let's see here. Well, I stand corrected on that one. I had to go look for myself. Are they playable or it would? Hmm. Let me see one more thing to look at. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks like it. I'll stand corrected on that one. I already had my last routine for all of the uh, seventh and eighth iterations before. So for the last 12, 13 years, people have been able to play Lizard Folk on Nycos. So I was not aware that they had become a fifth edition. Oh, that's true. Yeah, I think the other issue too is that the concept of brutality that was rampant and rife in role play games, say 2 editions ago, kind of died out. The concept of brutality and lethality in monster builds for game masters kind of went out the window with the arrival of the D20 Glut, which was pre Pathfinder. And in that time frame before that, the major film and book choices among people that were role play games were uh, Conan the Barbarian, King Cole, um, motion pictures like Hawk the Slayer and things like that, where there's a much more flashy sword and sorcery, visceral, we're going to die kind of an environment. And by the time we get to the worlds of Kryn and the beginning of Dungeons and Dragons 3.0, 3.5, there's a weather change in the novels that people are reading. Now we're looking at books like Mercedes Lackey and um, Annie McCaffrey, and the idea of lethality in stories for characters to play were downplayed pretty heavily. As a matter of fact, the very concept of, see, the concept of orc and half orc, specifically the orc as a player class, was unfathomable. Nobody could think of anybody playing that. The idea of being a half orc was literally from a case of brutality uh, in one direction only. I won't specify which one, but it was very stereotypically brutal. And that has all gone away. As a matter of fact, in I believe it was the Tomb of Annihilation. There's actually a female half orc that's described as beautiful, and it's just so bone jarringly different. Oh yeah, no, sleep. That was those kind of artifacts to magic were there the whole time. The idea of a fireball was that it filled a 30 by 30 volume of space. So if you threw it in a hallway, it came back at you. You could throw it 60 feet down and potentially still hit yourself because the backflow, because it's only a 10 by 10, the amount of volume that a sphere would hold would actually come right back down the hallway to you. So yeah, that's fair. And fifth edition's been the watchword for almost a decade now. So and right now there we go. There's another example. The entire rule system for psionics has been thrown out the window because it was arguably too hard and too difficult, and so they created ways to do mentalist powers using sorcery and warlock magics instead. I don't like I don't appreciate the fifth edition magic system at all. Mainly because I haven't liked any magic system going all the way back. As a young game master, I picked up a book called The Complete Fantasist. If you ever get a chance to find it, it's complete is spelled Compleat. Fantasist, Fantasist, Fantas, CIST, Fantasist. And it is amazing because it talks about magic in a completely different way. It disconnects it from a lore book system, it takes it away from uh, physical components and things like that, and realigns it so that a person's choice of magics have to do with what's available and where they are and things like that. So it made it a lot more. Um, yeah, no, the psionic powers in Dungeons and Dragons, especially when you're talking second edition, and actually advanced Dungeons and Dragons before it was actually the best mechanic out there. It was downright brutal as far as if you developed the mental psionics powers and built them up, you were Hellraiser kind of power. You manipulated the universe around every person that you dealt with, and it was a mess. It was arguably a lot of fun for some of the players, but man, from a game master standpoint, it was a nightmare. I always said that if you're going to play psychic, you got to wait till I have the psychic abilities, because otherwise I can't read player minds, and so therefore it wouldn't be fair for you to play a psionic when I can't even be one. So that's how I avoided it. Now, on the other hand, now in NycosRPG, a player can be a psionic specialist because you can choose to do your magics here, and therefore the amount of force you have has to do with how you convey what's going on in here to your target, most often through touch or through at least line of sight, so that you're actually engaging. And you have to have, like, for example, line of sight requires them to look at you. So you could have an effect, like, for example, let's say you wanted to create a Medusa like effect where you petrify your opponents. You could do that in Nikos RPG, but you'd have to depend on them seeing you. So I don't know who Alhun is. So you got me. Again, with a lore that I'm not familiar with, I don't even know what that name is. It sounds a little bit like Michael Moorcock. And oh, okay. Yeah, mind flayers are they were extremely devastating in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. They were the villain. They were, and liches were. They dominated storytelling back in those days because they were so devastatingly powerful. They were just downright scary. You wanted to have a player group run, throw in a couple of mind flayers, or throw in a couple of what's the other one I said? Lost my mind. But the idea is that have psychers in your campaign. You're going to liches because of their ability to uh, create unlife and throw like ridiculous magics unstoppingly. Yeah, they were the bad boys on the block back then. Matter of fact, went from being sort of Dungeons and Dragons to being monsters and mutants and mind flayers because the psionics were the death knell. You could literally wipe out a party with just one or two of them. So, that's fine. Yeah, and I don't follow D&D lore much anymore. Matter of fact, although I have a big shelf, you probably saw up here. I have all of the specialty covered books up here. So I've got Radiant City and all of that. I've got all of the product, but I don't read it for uh, lore purposes because Nikos is so lore heavy already. So I don't need to add any more to it. But we are on an hour and a half, and I didn't notice the commercials this time, so I hope they weren't too bad for you guys. I am going to be heading out of here in a couple of minutes, though. So, do you have any other? Okay, who got some more comments? Yes. Well, okay. So the challenge is D&D never really anchored you to priestly orders. Even back in the day, yeah, you had people who would focus on it when they wanted to, but there were no accountability rules. I mean, as a game master, I got in trouble a couple of times because I would hold players to the fact that they lost their abilities when they would do immoral acts. They kill off children, or they uh, murder a person without a trial and things like that. And so suddenly paladins lost their abilities, or clerics could no longer pray, or whatever. So the fact that paladins aren't tied to deities, they never really were. And furthermore, the very concept of paladin, as you may recall, is actually from the Saracen side of the line and didn't invoke any religious practices at all. The paladins, by definition, the original soldiers that were paladin, were honorable men, but they followed a code that required them to be chaste and moral and all of that. But they didn't have any mystical powers. That was all conveyed because Dungeons and Dragons didn't want the quote holy order knights to be associated specifically with the Catholic Church. And so they named them under that other convention. Whereas a paladin, by definition, is actually from its origin holy knights by the Catholic structure and stuff. So, and as far as the concept of oath breakers and death knights and other dark sided things, those are all arbitrary anyway. And one of the reasons why there's a classless system called NycosRPG, so that you don't get caught in that little trap, because classes have always been a problem. Anyway, I need to get out of here because it is 12:30. I want to thank you for your time with us. If you like what you've seen, follow us here on Twitch. And if you haven't got a chance yet, go over and check out the videos at NycosRPG on YouTube. And yep, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. The only knights you associate with cults, that's where it came from. They were the knights in the period that we're talking about, the Middle Ages. They were the only knights of Western faith. The paladin, the saladin, the other forms of knights were actually Arabic and Islamic, and were therefore associated with a completely different set of parameters than the Dungeons and Dragons knights, because the D&D knights go very much into concepts of the vigil and all of the sacraments and such. So they were clearly intended to be Christian in their origin. Um, when you go a little further and you look at the Rangers, for example, the Rangers much more were Tolkienian in their root, because they were basically cookie cutter off of Aragorn. But well, the concept of knighthood by itself was a religious thing. The concept of knighting someone was giving them power under your rulership as king, which was deferred to you pre Habsburg by the Catholic faith. So you were king because God made you king, and therefore you had the ability to convey knighthood. So yeah, there's all kinds of stuff there, and we can talk about that in another episode. I want to get out of here. We did talk about happiness, but we're way off field from that now. So have a great night, folks, and I'll see you next